with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Thursday, January 16th, 2025. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Dr. Annelle Sheline, former State Department official and Quincy Institute fellow, will join us to talk about the contours of this Gaza deal. And later in the show, Jael Holzman joins us to talk about the push to ban renewable energy in Oklahoma. Also on the program today, Netanyahu once again appears to torpedo a ceasefire agreement at the 11th hour, blaming Hamas. We will see how Trump takes this. In the hours after the deal was announced, Israel escalated its bombing, killing dozens more Palestinians in Gaza. ProPublica has a bombshell report on the Biden administration's suppression of dissent internally on Gaza and how the shadowy National Security Council took the reins. Trump officials back away from his promise to end the Ukraine war on day one. I think I could still do it. Biden tries to pull an Eisenhower, warns of a tech-industrial complex and a growing oligarchy as he leaves office in his final address.
So nothing fundamentally changed.
Right, but my legacy, Jack. It's out there in the archives. I said it. Relatedly, by the way, the Microsoft CEO flew to Mar-a-Lago and dined with Trump yesterday, and the Google CEO will attend the inauguration along with Zuckerberg, Musk, and potentially the TikTok CEO. And speaking of that, with that ban date nearing, Trump and Biden both are racing to take credit for slowing the ban despite previously supporting it. During her confirmation hearings, Trump's Attorney General pick Pam Bondi does not rule out prosecuting Trump's political enemies. It's already starting. The governor of Albania just approved Jared Kushner's $1.4 billion hotel project. The Biden administration canceled student loans for 260,000 former students of a for-profit college. A new FTC report finds that Brian Thompson's United Healthcare overcharged some cancer patients by nearly 1,000%.
Thank you, FTC.
And lastly, the NCAA will pay women's teams in the March Madness tournament, finally, after a unanimous board vote. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's an EmMajority Report Thursday. Hello to Matt, Bradley, Dorsey in the studio with us this week. Very nice. Hope everybody had a great Wednesday when I was out. Let's get right into it. The news on the potential ceasefire is moving very quickly. We'll be breaking all of that down with Dr. Annelle Sheline in just a few minutes. But so on Sunday, the TikTok ban is supposed to go into effect. They're supposed to shut down operations by January 19th. That is the day before Trump's inauguration. That is also supposedly when the ceasefire plan is supposed to be implemented, although, again, Netanyahu is putting impossible hurdles into it at the 11th hour, like he's done many, many times before. We'll see how Trump takes that. But the law that was passed, just to give people a refresher, this TikTok ban, do you have that timeline that I sent you? Axios did this, is kind of helpful in terms of like how this TikTok ban started. Trump tried to force the sale of TikTok towards the end of his presidency in 2020. But obviously, he had diminished political capital at that point. We were in the midst of a global pandemic, and his approval rating was in the toilet. But this lingered, and it was included in the Ukraine-Israel aid that passed at the end of April 2024. And Biden signed it into law, or at the very least, that's when he signed it. And then there was a lawsuit. The FTC and the DOJ sued TikTok. They went to court. The Supreme Court had their hearing. And it appears as though the Supreme Court is going to side in favor of this ban, because it was pretty explicit in the legislation that Biden signed into law. And they have a decision to make on Sunday, or to extend that 100-day deadline. And I think that's a big part of why you're seeing, not the ultimate reason, but one of the many reasons that these tech oligarchs are kissing the ring for Donald Trump. I think a lot of them want a piece of this, or they want it to go into effect, particularly Zuckerberg. Instagram is the biggest competitor to TikTok, and it would be a huge boon to his business if
they don't want to be
they weren't around.
They don't want to be seen supporting it. And so like Elon Musk will say, like, look, this is against free speech, even though it would help X. I don't want to see it happen. I don't think they're going to be spending a whole lot of lobbying effort toward making sure that it doesn't.
Right. And the point just here is like, now Trump and Biden are trying to stop TikTok from being banned because it's a hugely popular app for young people. You know who Trump made gains with in the last election? Young people. And I say all of this to say is that now Biden's scrambling to make sure the ban doesn't go through. Why did you sign that bill into law? I understand that it passed the House 352 to 65, the Senate 79 to 18. If those numbers held, it would have been a veto-proof majority. But it would, if the leader of the Democratic Party vetoed this legislation or didn't want this TikTok ban in place, that would change the calculation for so many of the other Democrats who voted yes on this. It just, no one's going to remember that Biden tried to save TikTok. They're going to remember that the ban happened under his watch. And then with this and Gaza, just handing the Republicans these easy victories. Here is Trump's pick for National Security Advisor Mike Waltz this morning on Fox and Friends, saying, don't you worry, folks, we're going to make sure that this doesn't take effect.
Could have an executive order to save the platform. I know a lot of people don't like it, national security concerns, but there are 170 million Americans who use it. So what's going to happen to it?
Well, President Trump, and this is in line with the legislation, we will put measures in place to keep TikTok from going dark. In the legislation allows for an extension as long as a viable deal is on the table. And then, essentially that buys President Trump time to keep TikTok going. It's been a great platform for him and his campaign to get his America First message out. But at the same time, he wants to protect their data. Conservatives don't want the FBI, and they certainly don't want the Chinese communists getting their passwords, getting their data, and being able to overly influence the American people.
I mean, what a shift in tone. What a shift in tone. And it's in part, Trump was going around in the campaign on all of Barron's favorite shows, Aiden Ross and these other streamers that are popular with young people. If Donald Trump stops a TikTok ban, are the Democrats trying to do? Make his approval rating go above 60%? It's already crossed 50%, which is expected ahead of an inauguration. But I'm just amazed at how much was left on the table at the really back half of this administration, almost to just give Republicans these easy ways to look like they were more democratically responsive to the public, when we know that Trump is as anti-democratic as it gets. He tried to overturn the results of an election last time 4 years ago. But when you're doing these broadly popular but easy things that aren't influenced by a national security think tank class that is so divorced from what regular people want, and in fact, they're undemocratic by design. But this is that's his whole history, and that's his whole tenure in Washington is, being in the tank for Israel and for our wars and for our deep state and for the national security establishment, which is also what motivated this ban. So it's fitting that these two things, whether it be this Gaza deal that hopefully goes through for the sake of everybody and every Palestinian and Israeli as well, and this TikTok ban, you're just doing, they allowed Trump to do broadly popular things potentially that he can take credit for. And it was completely within their control. I
mean, they generally make him look, relative to them, more democratic and free speech. And it's not to credit Trump, it's to denigrate them. Like, they're not democratic and open. And I would just say, I'm looking through some of the Democrats who voted for this. Jerry Connolly didn't vote. Interesting. Jasmine Crockett, I'm just through the C's. Jasmine Crockett, why is Jasmine Crockett voting present on that? You're supposed to be one of the young Democrats that is helping us win back this. What's going on in this party?
Right. Completely rudderless, no leadership. And, Biden made sure of that. And it's really unfortunate to see some of these easy things that the Democrats could have avoided. They could have just steered away from that iceberg, but they didn't.
Oh, Gottheimer voted to ban it. Interesting.
Yeah, that's not shocking, I guess, to me at all. But we will get to our conversation in just a second with Dr. Annelle Sheline. But first, a word from some of our sponsors here, folks. Firstly, Ritual. According to the CDC, fewer men than women meet the daily minimum intake recommendations for fruits and vegetables, and men are more likely to overvalue exercise and undervalue nutrition. But nutrition is very important. Ritual is there for you. It's a multivitamin scientifically designed for men to help fill nutrient gaps in their diets. Sam is a big fan of Ritual, especially because they make it so easy. They refill your vitamins and you don't have to worry about it forgetting when the bottle runs out and then never following up on it. Ritual offers a science-backed multivitamin for men 18 and over with high quality and traceable key ingredients in clean, bioavailable forms. It contains 10 key nutrients and 2 delayed release capsules per day, designed to dissolve later in the small intestine, an optimal place to absorb nutrients. They're gentle on an empty stomach. They have a minty essence in every bottle that keeps the multivitamins fresh and makes taking them actually enjoyable. It is rigorously tested and validated by a third party for allergens, microbes, and heavy metals. Ritual multivitamins are vegan, non-GMO, project verified, gluten and major allergen free, and made traceable. Ritual uses scientific tools to select lower carbon packaging, prioritize sustainably sourced ingredients, and set ambitious climate goals. Ritual is also a female-founded B Corp, meaning they're holding themselves accountable to not just their company's financial health, but also the health of the people and our planet. Essential for Men is a quality multivitamin from a company you can actually trust. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/majority. That's ritual.com/majority for 25% off your first month. And lastly, does your cat have digestive issues? Throwing up their food? Just issues eating? Is your cat simply in need of a diet upgrade? Well, we have all been there. You should check out our next sponsor, Smalls. I remember we got it shipped to the office. Sam was very excited to bring it home to the kitties, R.I.P. But I
know how sensitive their tummies are.
Yeah, and I regularly take care of a good friend's cat, and I kind of got used to. I'm thinking of getting a cat myself, actually, just because they're easy. But you can see how they can get really picky with their food. And Smalls is protein packed. Its recipes have preservative-free ingredients that you would find in your fridge, and it's delivered right to your door. That's why Cats.com named Smalls their best overall cat food. This podcast is sponsored by Smalls. To get 50% off your first order plus free shipping, head to smalls.com and use our promo code MAJORITY. And if you're still not a believer, New York Magazine called Smalls the best cat food according to veterinarians, while BuzzFeed said my cats went completely ballistic for this stuff. Smalls also has a bunch of amazing treats and snacks that you can add to your order. And after switching to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported overall health improvements. That is a big deal. Have a particularly picky cat? Well, Smalls has a sampler so your cat can try everything that they have to offer. And the team at Smalls is so confident your cat will love their product that you can try it risk-free. That means that they refund you if your cat won't eat their food. What are you waiting for? Give your cat the food they deserve. Head to smalls.com and use promo code MAJORITY at checkout for 50% off your first order plus free shipping. That's the best offer you'll find, but you have to use my code MAJORITY for 50% off your first order. One last time, that's promo code MAJORITY for 50% off your first order plus free shipping. All right, guys, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking to Dr. Annelle Sheline. We are back and happy to welcome back to the show Dr. Annelle Sheline, research fellow at the Middle East in the Middle East program at the Quincy Institute, former foreign affairs officer at the U.S. Department of State's Bureau on Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor's Office of Near Eastern Affairs. Annelle resigned over the Biden administration's Gaza policy in March 2024. Thanks so much for coming back on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So, of course, the news is moving very fast right now. There has been some reporting on this deal that was reached that Netanyahu has once again reportedly thrown a wrench into the ceasefire deal at the 11th hour. He delayed a cabinet vote on this ceasefire deal, and the Smotrich and Ben Gvir, if they left together, they could bring down his coalition, and they're unhappy with the idea that there would be any peace deal with Hamas or whatever. And then this morning I saw that Netanyahu or his office put out a statement denying that Israeli forces would withdraw troops from the Philadelphia corridor, which was a part of the agreement. So he's basically contradicting what the agreement says and then blaming it on Hamas. And then last night as well, they escalated their bombing campaign against Palestinians and killed at least 70 people. So sure looks like he's trying to sabotage this ceasefire deal, but what's your assessment of what we've seen over the past 48 hours?
I mean, like you said, it's been such an emotional roller coaster. I mean, my initial reaction yesterday was immediate pessimism as far as, my sense of it is that Trump just wanted this for his inauguration, and I didn't expect the ceasefire to outlive Monday. He just wants it in place for inauguration, and then Israel will be free to go back to its genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. I got some pushback yesterday, people saying, look, Trump does have interests in this not being a problem that he has to deal with. And, I hope that is true. But I think that clearly whatever Trump has promised Netanyahu, and that Netanyahu has also promised Smotrich and Ben Gvir, as well as Israeli society, much of whom remains fully committed to the genocide of Palestinians in Gaza, unfortunately. The notion that, they'll go right back to fighting, that perhaps the promising American support for annexation of the West Bank, I think that is something to keep in mind in general, that from the perspective of the Israeli far right, the West Bank is a much bigger prize than Gaza. Although I think from their perspective, they would like to maintain the assault on Gaza and annex the West Bank. From Trump's perspective, he's going to need to be able to show something to Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudis if he's going to achieve Israeli-Saudi normalization, which he thinks will earn him a Nobel Peace Prize.
Oh gosh, from a guy that photoshopped himself into Time Magazine most important person of the year for his golf resorts. I mean, that is the exact kind of thing that he would be drawn towards. It's just the idea that he could get some sort of fancy award. But there is, I think, and I agree with your assessment, but I do think that there's an interesting dynamic here where it seems that clearly Netanyahu was holding off, obviously, on making a deal with the Biden administration, in part because the Biden administration didn't use any leverage. I mean, not in part. This is the reason. And so the blame 100% lies with Biden here. But from Netanyahu's perspective, it very much mirrors the Iran hostages, Jimmy Carter's deal being scuttled so that, and Reagan making these back channel deals so that he could take credit. And then on his inauguration day, the hostages were released. Like, there is historical precedent for this. But I do wonder, was Netanyahu potentially caught off guard by how forceful Trump was with this? Because there is reporting about how his Middle Eastern envoy was like, I don't care if this is like a religious time to take off work. We're forcing this through anyway. That's from the outside is what it looks like.
No, I agree with you that 100% this demonstrates that Biden refused to use pressure. And this is what I observed inside the State Department, this sort of hand-wringing that, we're working tirelessly towards a ceasefire, as if the United States isn't directly enabling everything the Israeli military is doing. And that, even just the breadth of pressure from Trump coming in, who's not even president yet, got Netanyahu to provisionally agree to the ceasefire. As we said, it's unclear to what extent it will in fact manifest. I totally agree with you in terms of the parallels to the Iran hostage deal. As you said, the back channel deal to tank Carter's reelection campaign. I think it's, although yesterday all of the focus was on the hopeful announcement of a ceasefire, there was also news that came out yesterday about the results of a YouGov and IMEU poll, which showed that 29% of people who voted for Biden in 2020 but didn't vote for Harris in 2024 cited Gaza as their number one reason for not voting. This was over the economy. This was over immigration. My hope is that Democrats are listening and that moving forwards, they will understand that this was a huge part of why they lost the election. Obviously not the only issue. But clearly, Biden refused to use any pressure. Harris refused to break with him on that. This is part of why Trump won. And now, unfortunately, I think what everybody keeps saying, especially on social media, because I've been emphasizing, like, this is clearly a win for Trump. And people say, well, why are you giving Trump the win? And I'm saying it is a win for Trump, but it could have been a win for Biden. And he just refused to take the win. Right. And again, I think in the end, the Trump administration is playing all of us who are desperately hoping for peace for the Palestinian people, as well as the return of hostages held in Gaza.
And you mentioned that it could have been a win for Biden, but I'm curious, as in your role at the State Department, I know you weren't there for too long, but I did find ProPublica is doing phenomenal reporting on the suppression of dissent by the Biden administration on this very topic, which you experienced firsthand. But ProPublica, I thought it was really notable, reported that the State Department was, quote, marginalized in the last year, and that this policy has largely been the result of the National Security Council, which is a White House advisory board, but not the State Department is supposed to be our constitutional foreign policy arm. But the NSC has grown in power since its formation in the middle of the 20th century, and the article really said that Jake Sullivan, Brett McGurk, Amos Hochstein were significant players in this policy. Now, with the way that Biden performed at the debate and with how rudderless our leadership has seemed, I think this begs the question of how much were they entirely running this? And does this seem like the way that a policy would be run if it were run by career national security folks like Sullivan, Brett McGurk, and Amos Hochstein, because to me, that's what it looks like.
I definitely agree with you that this was coming from people like Brett McGurk, Jake Sullivan, other people at the National Security Council, rather than from the State Department. That's not to say that Antony Blinken was not a willing participant. I just don't think he was in the driver's seat. And really to commend Brett Murphy at ProPublica, who's been doing amazing reporting on all of this. I think that this just does indicate the way that the State Department has been marginalized for a long time. There were a lot of other people at the State Department who were trying to speak out against this, who were doing what they could within their limited channels to try to achieve a change. And I mean, this was coming directly from the top. So this was a big part of why I left, this question of, well, shouldn't you stay on the inside and do what you can on the inside? You couldn't change anything on the inside unless you were in the position of someone like Brett McGurk or Jake Sullivan. At the same time, I don't want to take away Biden's responsibility. Clearly, he is a committed Zionist and was fine with all of this. But I agree with you that it was he had expressed his preferences and then let his close advisors really drive what was happening moving forward. But I do think he was fully in support of it. I think another really important thing to keep in mind as we transition to the Trump administration, I mean, as people have said, I mean, Trump is not going to be better for Palestine. And in many ways, people have said, how could it get worse? It could get worse, especially with the annexation of the West Bank. This is something that came up when I was in Jordan. Jordanians are very concerned about this. I think another really scary thing that Trump may have promised to Netanyahu and possibly the Saudis is some kind of security guarantee for Saudi Arabia in exchange for Israeli normalization, which would require the United States military to fight to defend Saudi Arabia, which would be an incredibly foolhardy policy to undertake, especially because of the moral hazard that would create for Saudi Arabia. So the same way that we've seen this unconditional support for Israel generating this incredibly aggressive foreign policy with Israel invading Lebanon, continually violating that so-called ceasefire, invading Syria, destroying their military, possibly prepared to take military action against Jordan if and when they annex the West Bank. And so we could see we could see Saudi Arabia behaving very similarly in terms of if they have this sort of unconditional military support from the United States. We saw what MBS did before with his invasion of Yemen. It's my hope is maybe he's matured a bit and has learned, but I do think that he would be very likely to behave quite similarly to Israel if he was given this same sort of open-ended American military support for whatever he chose to do.
And the value of this from the perspective of, I mean, honestly, of Saudi Arabia, it's very little in terms of like what they would have to do for a trade-off. They already do business with the Israelis. They just don't do it formally because of how hated the United States and Israel is in the region. So they basically just formalize what they're already doing. And then they could get military and security guarantees from the United States, as you say, in the same way that we've entangled ourselves with Israel. It's astounding. But this was the trajectory that was set off by Trump with the Abraham Accords, continued by Biden. I mean, we mentioned Brett McGurk here. McGurk's role was he was kept on by Biden. He was in the Trump administration. Like, if you could just talk about the destabilizing force of this, the destabilizing effects of now across potentially 3 different 4-year terms of American presidencies, pursuing this normalization deal and potentially offering weapons and security guarantees for Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. I mean, I think that while there are some ways that Biden and Trump will be different, unfortunately, on foreign policy, they're likely to be very similar, including the hawkishness towards China, hawkishness towards Iran. I worry that things may be worse under Trump, given his selection of personnel for his cabinet and other appointments. my concern there is that this extends far beyond just the Middle East. But absolutely, that this same sort of this notion that it is in America's interest for Israel to have normalized relations with its Arab neighbors in order to sort of have a unified anti-Iran coalition is just deeply destabilizing. And Israel may see that as perhaps being in its own interest, but it is not in American interests, partly just because the United States is not fundamentally threatened by Iran. Iran cannot harm the United States except to the extent that there are American troops that continue to be stuck in places like Syria and Iraq, where their missions have been completed, and yet they're sitting there, sitting ducks for Iranian armed militias to continue attacking. So, I mean, my hope moving forward, and I do think that we are seeing a generational shift here in terms of Americans who've been so horrified by what Israel has done to the Palestinian people, that we are unlikely to continue to see the same level of support. You know, the Israel lobby remains quite powerful in the United States, but it has to spend more resources, more money to achieve what it used to be able to do, you know, kind of without even trying all that hard, because there was such bipartisan support for this notion that that the interests of the Israeli government and the interests of the US government were so aligned. And I do want to make clear, I mean, for the Israeli people, you know, I've been in touch with people in Israel who are so tired of the war, the same way Palestinians are obviously so exhausted by the war and, you know, going on 100, you know, soon 100 years of occupation, if you kind of go back beyond the creation of the State of Israel, that I do think it's very important to keep in mind that there are many people inside Israel who do want the war to end. At the same time, I did think it was instructive that you continue to hear this notion that Palestinians don't want peace. And yet it was, you know, these scenes of incredible joy in Gaza, elsewhere in the Arab world, of people celebrating when they thought that a ceasefire deal was happening, whereas you're seeing all this backpedaling from the Israeli government and, you know, so many Israeli media sources bemoaning the idea that there could be a ceasefire and a release of these hostages. So I do think it's just instructive of, well, who's really underneath, you know, who's driving this conflict here. And in many ways, this does go back to America's unconditional support for Israel and going back to America's potential unconditional support for Saudi Arabia, which would be incredibly destabilizing.
And just is something that we need to be monitoring extremely closely. But the overarching, back to the point that you made about how Gaza harmed the Democrats' electoral chances in this race, like, I'm curious, as somebody who works in the foreign policy field as, you know, an academic and has worked in the State Department, there have been a lot of, I would say, leftists who have written for years about the disconnect between public opinion and foreign policy. And I don't know if there's actually, since Bush, I mean, Bush and Biden in the past, or in my lifetime at the very least, have really, I think, driven that wedge even further. And I think it undercut the ability for the Democrats to talk about Donald Trump's threat as a threat to democracy, when democracy also is weighed by your responsiveness, not on election day, but on all of the other days. And, you know, you see that also, but in Israel, you're right that there are Israelis that are pushing back against this, but unfortunately, still the majority opinion within Israel, and it's maybe not in Tel Aviv, it's maybe more in the settlements and outside of the cities, that you don't see it as visibly on the streets, but the majority sentiment within Israel is still pro-genocide. So Netanyahu has that coalition, or that to worry about for his own political ambitions. But then in the United States, for Trump, for all his faults, he's still at least he tries to engage in this in a transactional way, and he has a million faults, and I don't trust him. But I could see him being more swayed by that element of public opinion than Biden was.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you that I think Trump is more in touch with where public sentiment is on this issue. And I hope that members of the MAGA coalition are still paying attention. I mean, unfortunately, I do think that a big part of who Trump is listening to on this is the sort of evangelical Christian base, whose main interest is to have the Jews in Israel in order to bring about the second coming of Christ, which seems a little crazy that this
and
is
then most of those Jews
our...
die in that event.
Exactly. Yes. And that you have the Israeli government openly, willingly partnering not only with these people, but also with members of the far right in Europe. I mean, there's been a long ongoing campaign of partnership there. I agree with you, though, that in general, under Biden, under previous administrations, we do see an extreme disconnect between American foreign policy and American public opinion. I hope that we'll start to see a bit of a shift with Trump. And, I know people are probably tired of hearing this, but the old institutional mechanisms of calling your member of Congress, we at the Quincy Institute do outreach on the Hill, and we know that Hill staffers confirm that, when a constituent calls in about an issue, they take a tally, so calling your member of Congress, calling your senator can have a big impact. I know it can feel super frustrating. I feel frustrated by it as a resident of Washington, D.C., where we don't have a voting member of Congress that we can call, which is maddening. But, I really wish I did have representation in Congress. In addition to that, I hope that as the Democrats are thinking about the upcoming elections, they will really reconsider this sort of false notion that foreign policy doesn't decide elections, because we've seen Trump successfully campaign in two different elections on being the less hawkish candidate, being the candidate of peace, which I think is somewhat nonsensical. But when you're looking at who he's up against, people like Hillary Clinton, for example, or Biden/Harris actively funding a genocide, it's not hard that he's able to sort of fill that role. So
it's by default, basically.
Exactly. It's by default. So I think it has been extremely instructive, like that poll that I mentioned earlier about how Gaza actually was a huge issue and why you just didn't see the numbers for Harris that you'd seen for Biden. It wasn't that necessarily that, Trump won so many more. It was just people didn't feel motivated to get out and vote for Harris. And now we know the most important issue was Gaza, which is kind of shocking when you think about it.
Right. I do think that, people just said, I can't put my support behind this. And the messaging around Trump's threat just rang so much more hollow because of diminishing returns and the fact that he was no longer in power. And that's going to be some of the lessons from this election. But in terms of, you mentioned West Bank annexation and the threat that poses, Donald Trump did take over $100 million from Miriam Adelson, who wants West Bank annexation. But do you think that West Bank annexation could accelerate a conversation in the United States about apartheid and not having this really fictitious two-state solution pablum being basically what the Democrats roll out? Because it's already a one-state reality in the West Bank and in Gaza. And we don't have any Democratic politicians talking about one state as it should be when we're combating apartheid, but it's even worse, of course. They're committing genocide too. Do you think that could have an effect? Do you think that the Israelis could overreach, and we could begin to, if the West Bank is more formally annexed, change the conversation around Palestine and Israel?
I think you're right. That certainly would change the conversation and just make it impossible to continue to spout this nonsense about the possibility of a two-state solution, which continues to be the official position of the United States government, at least until now under Biden. I worry that even if it was enough to change the conversation, because as we've talked about, I think the conversation has already changed significantly. There's a generational change here. It's amazing to see how many people are no longer willing to sort of believe the myth that Israel is a force for good in the world, or even America is a force for good in the world, or that this notion that Israel has a right to defend itself or Israel has a right to exist begs the question, well, what about Palestinians' right to defend themselves? What about Palestinians' right to exist? So I think you're right that full-on annexation would further drive that conversation, but my fear is that what would that end up looking like? Right. I mean, even if the conversation shifts in the United States, at that point, we're facing a reality of 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank, some portion of them being forced over the border into Jordan, most likely. This would be extremely destabilizing for Jordan. That would violate the terms of the 1994 peace treaty with Jordan, forcing the King of Jordan to respond, which he is unlikely to do given his dependence on the US government, or to risk being overthrown because he would refuse to respond and his population wouldn't stand for it. So I just, again, my overarching concern is that you have this notion coming from the Biden people and soon I'm sure to be echoed by the Trump people that what Israel has done has been in US interests, that Israel was willing to go after Hezbollah and Israel has weakened Iran. I think and this note like Sullivan crowing about how the US is in like such a stronger position now than it was, which is nonsense, because what you have is an even more unstable Middle East. You have an entire new generation of people completely radicalized by this, not only in Palestine, but across the whole region. And you have Biden's chief counterterrorism person saying as much, that, this notion that the United States we can move past the war on terror now, this will be such a huge issue going forwards for people who have had to watch a genocide of their own people over the past 15 months. So this notion that, the US may not have liked the way Israel did it, but this is actually in US interests, false. The US is at extremely high risk of being dragged into yet another unnecessary war in the Middle East, especially in terms of who Trump is putting in positions of influence, who are extremely hawkish on Iran and want to go after Iran's nuclear facility, the sites where they're trying to build a nuclear weapon, or where Trump says they're trying to do so. This is contested. We also have the lingering issue of the Houthis in Yemen. There's another question there of the United States continues to provide security for largely Chinese and Russian ships passing through the Red Sea, whereas European and American ships and others tend to go around the Horn of Africa. So, I think I think you're right that the conversation would shift. I just worry that at that point, the United States might be bogged down in another war.
Right. In the region. And the bloodiness of what would come is it's just trying to look for some cracks here, because I didn't mean to cut you off, Annelle, but Trump as a more transactional politician, or he fancies himself as an elite deal maker, that is where we have the opportunity to get outcomes that are not objectively horrific. But for all the stuff that he's not going to be pouring over, and we know that he is one of the laziest people on the planet and does not take a significant interest in the finite details of what his team is going to be doing, the people he's appointed are as hawkish as it gets. So on these top line things, I understand people's optimism, and it's been 15 months of this genocide, and we do want to see a deal happen. But for Marco Rubio, we just played Mike Waltz here. Mike Pompeo is a Christian Zionist freak, true believer, who's the ambassador to Israel. I mean, Elise Stefanik led those Red Scare style hearings against college university presidents, and she's going to be the UN ambassador. So everything else outside of his self-interest ahead of the inauguration indicates even more hawkishness towards the Middle East.
Exactly. And, there I think were some people who, when he was elected, were hopeful that, maybe you'd see more of a J.D. Vance side of things, of kind of the MAGA wing that's more interested in trying to reduce American imperialism abroad, focus all those resources here at home. This notion that we can't provide for Americans, or we're going to condition aid to Americans devastated by the wildfires in Los Angeles, but we're not going to condition the billions and billions of dollars we continue to send to Israel for their genocide. I agree with you that things are changing and that there is a potential here for a foreign policy that actually reflects the needs and interests of ordinary Americans. But I do think that it's a huge red flag. All of the people that he has nominated to surround him seem extremely hawkish, extremely, I think there was this question of, during his first term, you had people in the room, the adults in the room that could try and restrain him. I worry that now he's surrounded himself with people who will simply goad him on and encourage, and in particular, this unconditional support for Israel and for whatever Israel wants to do, including bombing Iran.
Right. God. Lastly, Annelle, if this fails, do you think that there was an element of the Biden administration being afraid to push Israel on this because they were afraid of what is going to be reported? Once independent investigators get into Gaza, we know that the death toll is dramatically undercounted at this point, and more details are going to come out. I mean, we're already seeing through this ProPublica reporting. My thesis is that we're going to get more reporting on Biden's ineffectual leadership being a result of him declining and that compounding his Zionism that already was in place. Like, is that part of what you think might have been some of the self-interest involved here? Is once this ends, there will be accountability?
I certainly hope there is accountability. And I agree with you that Israel nor the United States had any interest in more journalists getting in and on the ground. I do think, the arrogance of Biden yesterday when the reporter asked about, well, who deserves credit for this, you or Trump? And him asking, is that a joke? When obviously Trump deserves the credit here.
I know, but like the credit thing is like every journalist just wants to know, do you assign Trump credit or Biden? It's like, okay, this is now they care about Gaza. If we can give one president credit and the other one not, if we can make it about a partisan fight. I mean, it's just so shameless. But anyway, yes, it was ridiculous by Biden.
I totally agree. That the point here should be accountability for everyone. And as soon as Trump takes office, all of that shift in accountability goes to him. And the fact that there are U.S. laws continually being broken because Israel is blocking American humanitarian aid into Gaza, that the Leahy laws prevent U.S. security assistance from going to a foreign military committing gross violations of human rights, which Israeli soldiers continuously post videos of themselves committing. This is all going to be on Trump. And so my concern is that there will be, Trump will have no incentive to hold anyone from Biden's team accountable on this, which means that it's really just up to ordinary people. And including, I'm certain that members of the Biden administration will try to go take these plum lucrative positions at elite universities to be, to give courses on their foreign policy making genius. And I just hope that students and faculty at these universities will not allow that to happen, that they will shout them down and protest and say, even if the university administration thinks it's great to have Samantha Power or Jake Sullivan or Brett McGurk teaching a class there, that it's the students and faculty who will now have this opportunity after their protest movements were completely shut down by those administrations and by laws from Congress trying to completely block free speech on the issue of Israel, that it'll now be in their power to prevent that from happening and prevent these people from just rejoining society and pretending like they weren't actively facilitating a genocide this whole time.
Well, of those parties involved, I do have more faith in the students than anybody else there. So appreciate your time today, Dr. Annelle Sheline, research fellow in the Middle East program at the Quincy Institute, former State Department official who resigned over Biden's Gaza policy. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, quick break. And when we come back, we will be speaking about Oklahoma's efforts to ban renewable energy. Be right back. We are back, and we are joined now by Jael Holzman, senior reporter at HeatMap, whose piece on this topic is entitled "The Growing Push to Ban Renewable Energy in Oklahoma." Jael, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So, can you give us a sense of what's happening in Oklahoma right now? I saw last week there were protests at the state Capitol building in Oklahoma City. You were writing about this, trying to get the governor Stitt to stop new wind and solar construction. Where is this coming from?
Sure. So the push to ban renewable energy in Oklahoma is almost at full tilt. And it is reasonable to expect a growing push in states across this country to ban construction of solar projects, wind projects, the kind of decarbonization projects that one would want to see, hope to see in a decarbonizing world, a world that's moving fast to reduce its consumption on fossil fuels. Those projects are being targeted increasingly by activists on the ground, people who either don't want them for their views, for their property values, for fears about conspiracies around impacts to the environment, health, people nervous simply because they don't understand these technologies. There is a growing uprising against renewable energy in this country, and Oklahoma is front and center in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's crazy because Oklahoma is the third largest generator of wind energy, as you write, in the country, which I wasn't even aware of. But I mean, there are I guess there's tornadoes, right? I should know that just by discernment. But like, can you explain as to why there's opposition? I mean, it can't just be industry making this case. Like, clearly, if there's any kind of grassroots opposition, there's got to be some reasoning behind it as well. It's not just AstroTurf.
No. So what I do as a journalist, I write for HeatMap News, a fossil-free news outlet that was launched last year by some friends of mine. And I came aboard a few months ago to begin coverage of these conflicts over solar projects, wind projects, large battery projects, hydrogen, carbon capture, you name it, any kind of industrial project geared at the energy transition. I write about the conflicts building them, because when you build anything big, when a large company comes in, especially one that's not from the United States, we're used to seeing people have questions, have concerns. And our democracy historically has had avenues to deal with this. You may or may not have heard the phrase permitting reform bandied about by people in Washington, lobbyists. What that is, at least in part, is an effort to try and deal with the conflicts that arise when you build large things. And we do need to build large things to get off of fossil fuels. What I've found in my reporting, however, is that as we've tried to build more and more of these projects, they've shown up in people's backyards to such an extent that it's becoming really common if you live in Ohio, in Oklahoma, in more rural areas of this country that are sought after to build big things where fewer people live. People are starting to hear about this stuff. Just like vaccines, just like other medical innovations, the more people learn about this, the more they have questions. And if you're used to some conspiracy-laden parts of the internet, you're used to the phrase, do your own research. In Oklahoma, they did their own research. There's an insurgent movement run by farmers, ranchers, environmental activists, geared at focusing the state on how, as wind energies become huge in the state, there may or may not be impacts to property values, water pollution, environmental hazards like endangered species. And people do have reasonable questions to ask about innovations in an economy that I think a lot of your listeners and viewers know is not always representative of what the people want, but more so what large corporations want. And we're handling climate mostly through tax credits these days that go to large corporations. However, what's happening in Oklahoma is not something viewed with the environment in mind all of the time. And in fact, some of the people pushing to ban renewable energy in the state say they want to do it to help oil and gas production, which is hardly a benefit for the environment or climate action.
And there's this interesting dynamic where the governor, Kevin Stitt, he wants jobs in his state, right? I mean, he wants investment in his state, and you're seeing this a little bit here in New York State, right? Like with the CHIPS Act and all of that kind of increase in production, you saw some Republican lawmakers from New York have to kind of embrace it as well, because once the law is passed, it's difficult to claw back for politicians that are already locked in because they don't want to shutter projects and they don't want to say no to business coming to their state. But you have other Republicans who want to run for governor after Stitt angling and criticizing the renewable energy efforts within the state. So that it seems like a lot of this is just these Republicans trying to gain power and angling for like, hey, oil and gas, fund me, I'll kill this solar project in the state.
Well, I mean, that is one way to look at it. It is also possible to look at this as a growth of a sort of what's been dubbed, at least in part, as a green MAGA movement. This insurgent activist bend that combines the cautious parts of environmentalism with the culturally reactive parts of social conservatism. It can be best explained through the rise in popularity of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a figure who used to be a Democrat and is now siding with our incoming president despite him having many beliefs that he disagrees with, and even forcing him to sit with fast food on camera. I would hazard to say that this is an organic movement in of itself. I mean, anytime you look at any rise of any movement, you're going to find hints and dashes of ties to different interests that have a benefit, economic benefit, a profit motive involved. But some of this is populist, right? I mean, when we're handling our fight to deal with climate action with largely tax credits for large corporations, you are going to have people who feel like they're not getting anything out of it. Too often I hear when I talk to communities who are the backyards for solar projects, wind projects, I hear concern about how little tax revenue is going to come. I hear concerns about how few jobs are going to come. And I personally worry as somebody who covers the fights over these projects amidst a cascading number of climate-fueled hazards, that there's a disconnect, and that, in fact, misinformation on the internet and a siloing in different portals online is making it so different conversations happen at different times, and no one's talking to one another about how to come together and create a cheaper energy system that doesn't hurt poor people and also deals with climate change.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something too. The tax credit model for climate change mitigation, it just doesn't necessarily, I think, create the level of public trust that would beat back some of the conspiracism that you described. Can you explain to our audience how these tax credits work and how they are being implemented under federal law, and why that may exacerbate some gaps in understanding?
Sure. So the Inflation Reduction Act, the nation's first climate law, came into effect a few years ago under President Biden. And what it originally started as was a different law entirely. You may or may not remember the Build Back Better Act, this big package of social safety net programs. There was also an effort there to try and create more sticks, more penalties on people who pollute, whether they're producers of steel and aluminum and cement, or automakers. There was really an attempt, and there still are people who are trying to attempt to create forms of carbon taxes or border adjustment mechanisms to penalize people who produce lots of carbon dioxide emissions. The issue that we face right now is the only kind of climate policy that can become law in our Congress today, even when Democrats control both houses of our Congress, is corporate-friendly tax policy. It is the only policy that we know can actually move through Congress today. And that may benefit in the short term people who want to build energy generation that does not consume fossil fuels. But because it doesn't penalize the companies who emit carbon, it doesn't create the system that experts say locks in the need for those credits. And that's how you wind up with situations like, I mean, just in my newsletter alone, I cover solar and wind projects that are quietly dropping off across this country, left and right, situations where companies are not putting out press releases, but instead are filing in court or telling lawmakers without putting out an announcement that they're actually canceling a project or two ahead of the start of the Trump administration. The concern is that we could see a Keystoneization under Trump, where instead of oil pipelines, the federal government is weaponized against the construction of wind and solar projects. And if the tax credits are the only thing keeping those projects there, I think corporate America is going to say, what's going to hurt if we cancel this project?
We'll take the money and run.
There aren't that many jobs to begin with, you know?
We'll take the money and run, basically. I mean, there isn't enough of a stick. There's only carrots, right, to get these corporations to come to the table. And you mentioned some of these credits, like people may not realize Elon Musk, for example, with Tesla, not that that's his big moneymaker anymore, but so much of what they're making money off of now is selling these carbon credits, right? I think they're called, which essentially allows other companies to go over emission thresholds, and Tesla will basically say, okay, we'll take that on, and they sell it to these corporations. So any stated like social or climate progress that electric vehicles from those Tesla factories are making a dent in terms of climate change, right? It's offset by the fact that they're making money now selling these credits to polluters, which is just insanity.
There's a danger in relying solely on tax credits. Right now, we're looking at Congress potentially rewriting this first climate law. And I myself have done quite a bit of reporting in Congress and now for HeatMap covering the individual projects about how likely it is for the nation's first climate law to stay intact. And it is true that there's a potential for the companies that benefit from these very large tax credits for building solar and wind facilities and for consuming this electricity and for producing electric vehicles or the parts that go into them. There is a world in which those large companies lean on the more business-friendly members of Congress and successfully keep the biggest corporate tax breaks in there. But the experts that I talk to say it's exceedingly likely that, at a very minimum, all of the parts of the first climate law that benefited the most marginalized in society, money that goes towards environmental justice, money that goes towards heat pumps that are affordable for people to own, money that goes towards people, actually ordinary consumers buying electric vehicles, those are the things most likely to get cut. And there's a risk that the first climate law at the end of this next Congress isn't even really a climate law, just large tax breaks for data companies and tech companies, which is certainly not ideal. That's definitely a take the money and run situation unless something goes a different way.
And there does seem to, at the very least, be a desire or like an understanding from those on the right that they need to at least make gains in the electric vehicle sector. I mean, I'm really putting the bar quite low. But this is my way to transition into, you wrote about Trump's Greenland obsession, because Greenland has all those rare earth minerals that are necessary for those electric vehicle battery manufacturing. Can you speak a little bit about that, and that being kind of another frontier of extraction for capitalists and people like the Republicans in this country?
There are a litany of minerals and materials and metals that are quite rare that are used to produce the kinds of things that large corporations label as clean energy or green energy. As a journalist, I have reported on and even visited communities that are the front lines of this extraction for quote unquote green energy. And it's hardly green. It would be hard to say that mining for building anything is literally clean at all. You move a lot of dirt. You need stuff like cobalt and nickel and lithium to produce batteries for electric vehicles and to create the giant storage facilities that hopefully we can use to keep cleaner electricity intact and still usable, even at times where a solar project can't produce electricity, right? And on top of that, you need a bunch of different minerals, rare earths that are found in places like Greenland, as well as certain pockets of the African continent that historically have been colonized, certain pockets of Central and South America that have been colonized historically. And there is a risk that human rights experts have told me over the years in the transition away from fossil fuels, if left unabated, also becoming a new cycle of resource colonialism and a form of nationalist motivated extractivism. The Greenland obsession may not be entirely about minerals. There are other theories that float about online, but it's important to say that at the outset that if Greenland holds all these minerals, the people who are native to that region and who live there now also have a vested interest in determining what happens to those materials. And they have themselves, through their own democratic process, at their own ballot boxes, regularly sided with politicians who do not support more mining on the island of Greenland. So if the U.S. were to somehow intercede and try to take it over under the auspices of rare earth minerals, that would certainly not be a net benefit for the history of a just transition. Maybe we'll get more resources at a cheaper buck, or we won't need China as much, but it certainly wouldn't be a just energy transition if that's what folks in the climate movement would like to see.
I mean, is that the fear of just an eco-fascism? I know that term can mean things in ways that are, I don't know, good faith, or sometimes are deployed in ways that are bad faith. But that's what that frontier could look like, right?
There's a danger in using the term eco-fascism. I have myself studied this matter as a journalist. Defining eco-fascism to many people is a hard nut to crack. What can be said about the circumstances we find ourselves in today with respect to how the Trump administration is going to handle the climate is it's still important to center the likelihood of climate denialism and the impact on science that we could see. The threat of our nation's smartest minds in climate forecasting and in weather, even having to leave the government because they won't do what politicians say, is a danger for the U.S.'s respectability across the world. And the salience of our science. We have been pioneers globally in climate science, and a damage to that in and of itself, even if it includes resource extraction for an energy transition, is a loss for the climate and for the ecology, which is so impacted by the climate.
And lastly, you mentioned how people who are indigenous to Greenland would be affected by this, and how they would need to have a piece of the pie here. I mean, this is like their sovereign territory, right? In Oklahoma, just to bring it back to that particular instance, there is that issue of some tribal opposition to some of this extraction and the development of these renewable energy facilities, just because there's a lot of land in Oklahoma that is under tribal sovereignty. If you could just talk a little bit about that before we wrap up here.
Absolutely. Tribal sovereignty is deeply important and is at risk from the transition away from fossil fuels. However, the fossil fuel economy itself has done quite a number on tribal sovereignty around the world. It's important to note that in this pocket of the United States, tribal rights and the fossil fuel economy have gone quite hand in hand. In Oklahoma, for example, recently a judge ruled that an entire utility-scale wind farm would have to be taken down in response to an inability to get consent from the Osage Nation. It's important to note that the Osage Nation has a whole film about it, directed by Martin Scorsese, about how it itself became wealthy on the backs of the oil and gas boom in the U.S. over these past centuries. It is important to respect tribal sovereignty and to respect the will of peoples who have been driven off their ancestral lands. It is also important to recognize that anytime we don't build a wind farm and instead continue to use fossil fuel at the pace that we are today, it is not good for everyone, including people who live on lands that they would like to be unabated.
Jael Holzman, senior reporter at HeatMap. You can read the piece on this topic and others, including one that just came out about Trump's obsession with those windmills in HeatMap. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.
Of course. All right, folks, with that, we're going to wrap up the free part of this program and head into the fun half, where we will take your calls and read your IMs. On ESPN today, Bradley and I are going to be giving our picks for divisional weekend. Perhaps we'll talk a little bit about the national championship as well. Marcus Freeman and the Fighting Irish. Can they pull it off? I'm not sure. YouTube.com/ESPN show today.
When's the last time the Irish won a national championship?
Gosh, it's got to be a really long time at this point, Bradley. I mean, I remember when they got smoked when I was in high school. Like, they were destroyed. Oh, gosh. Yeah, when was the last time?
They had that good season when I kind of was into college football. I think Ty Willingham was their head coach, and they started like, oh, what was his name? The guy who had the fake girlfriend.
Manti Te'o.
Te'o was on the team.
Yes.
It looks like the last time they won was 1988.
Right.
But they were in the title game in 2012, but lost.
Right, that's
Alabama.
what I'm thinking of. Alabama destroyed them. Right. That was there, but like they're starting to get a little bit of NIL money. They're one of the few teams, like good teams in college football, that has a black head coach and like isn't a deeply old school kind of institution. So
Notre Dame isn't?
What'd you say?
Maybe not football-wise.
No,
It's
it
probably some
definitely is. Definitely is. I mean, Ohio State is probably going to win that game. But anyway, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning, we had Francesca Fiorentini on to talk about the fires in Los Angeles. Also talked about the loneliness epidemic, in which, I mean, one interesting data set I've seen, which is about 30, 40 years ago, it was lower income people who were more likely to be coupled up. Now it is both have fallen. Higher and lower income people are less likely to be coupled up, but it is higher income people that are more likely to be coupled up. Interesting stuff going on. Neoliberalism doesn't portend well to trying to fight against, say, young people going to toxic places like Andrew Tate and stuff. But anyway, patreon.com/Left Reckoning to talk about, or to listen to us talk about that. And we got guests here.
We have our friends. Hello. 1 second.
Here.
While Matt does that
should be coming up.
There they are. Hello. Brandon, you're muted. And Binder should be there soon. But there's Binder. Can we hear you?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, it's just Brandon who's been silenced. So why don't you go ahead, Binder? What's going on your show?
Sure. Tonight, youtube.com/Matt Binder. Tune in for an episode of Leftist Mafia. There'll be a lot to talk about. So tonight, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. See you all there.
All right. Brandon? No, still not. Dang.
We might need to work on that.
We may need to work on that.
Check out the Discourse, folks.
Yes. I've been trying to watch your streams, Brandon, but it looks like you have no videos on your channel. You've got to but you got to go to the live tab.
Oh, the VOD's not?
Yeah, I know. Well, we can't hear you. We'll figure it out. But check out Brandon's streams over on the Discourse. They are awesome. It's the Discourse with a 3 for the E. That's how you can tell it's Brandon's channel. All right, 646-257.
We start slandering Brandon because he can't talk.
Yeah. Figure it out, buddy.
He's doing mime.
Oh, you're in the box. This is the highest form of comedy, miming. No, it's not. All right, 646-257-3920. See you there.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the Majority Report.
Wait, look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
I think you need to take over for Sam. Yes, please. No. I'm gonna pause you right there. Wait, what? You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. So was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. So was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. What? Tour, sushi, and poker.
Tim's upset.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. So was offered a tour, sushi, and
that's what we call it in the biz.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Right.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Well, look at how sad he's become now. We shouldn't even talk about it because I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Oh my God. Tour, wow. Sushi. I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind. So was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Logic. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Boy. Tour. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid. Tour. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I had this debate 7,000 times. A little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid. Tour. I'm losing my fucking mind.
Some people just don't understand.
So I'm not trying to be a dick right now, but I absolutely think the U.S. should be providing me with a wife and kids.
That's not what we're talking about here. Okay, all right.
It's not a fun job. Tour? That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. Willy Wonka tour? That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. What's that offered a tour? That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. That's a tour? A real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. What's that offered a tour?
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Rogan has done it again.
That offered a tour? That's a real thing. That's poker with the boys. I think he might be blowing it out of proportion. Real thing. That's poker with the boys. That offered a tour? That's a real thing. That's poker. Let's go, Joey. Tour? Sushi and poker with the boys.
Take it easy, bro.
Tour, Sushi and poker.
Things have really gotten out of hand.
Sushi and poker with the boys. Delusional.
Deluded.
Sushi.
You don't have a clue as to what's going on. Live YouTube.
Sam has like the weight of the world on his shoulders. Sam doesn't want to do this show anymore. It was so much easier when the Majority Report was just you. You were happy.
Let's change the subject.
Right. Rangers and Knicks game, right?
Now shut up. You don't want people saying reckless things on your program.
That's one of the most difficult parts about this show.
This is a pro-killing podcast.
I'm thinking maybe it's time we bury the hatchet.
Left is best. Violet.
Don't be foolish and don't fucking tweet at me and don't bitch. The way Emma has cucked all of these people, love it.
That's where my heart is, so I wrote my honors thesis about it.
Oh,
sorry.
She wrote an honest thesis. I guess I should hand the main mic to you now.
You are to the right of me on foreign policy.
We already fund Israel, dude. Are you against that?
That's a tougher question I have an answer to.
Incredible theme song.
Hi, Bumbler.
Emma Vigeland, absolutely one of my favorite people. Actually, not just in the game, like period.
Live.
We are back. These guys, we have Brandon. Hello. No longer silenced. Yes.
I'm no longer silent.
No longer. You guys were talking about this Elon Musk video game thing. I don't really fully get it. My understanding is that he's been paying allegedly good players to play under his username, and then like he's done live streams where he has to play the game, and it's obvious that he doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah, so he's ranked in like an absurdly high level in these games, a level that you can only, I think it's Diablo is the game, but a level that you can only get to if you play straight like 40 hours, like
a week,
you know, in 2 days or something like that.
Okay,
like an insane amount. That somebody who says I'm running a whole bunch of businesses, I'm a titan of industry, and I'm also on Twitter all the time, could not conceivably do, even just deducing from that.
Right.
But then he went online to stream, and these guys did a sort of watch along of his, and he makes a lot of sort of obvious mistakes. And we'll watch the first minute of this and maybe skip ahead to see some of the more egregious things.
Oh, good. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I will say it's not Diablo 4. So he claimed to have been ranked, and maybe his account was ranked very highly, I think top 20 in Diablo 4 a while ago. The game he got caught not being very good at live is Path of Exile 2, which is another like CRPG, like ARPG, like Diablo-like game.
Okay. I don't even, what console do you play this on? I don't even know.
It's
any
PC.
Computer. Okay.
Yep.
These are games that you have to be like absolutely addicted to. Like these aren't like games.
Yeah, you gotta know
like,
life
wow.
these.
Like when I got really good at Elden Ring, which is another game Elon like was busted faking, he had a terrible build at. It's an antisocial period of your life.
Okay.
Oh,
Understood.
1 second here.
At one point, I have a lifetime of playing video games. At one point, I was, maybe one of the best Quake players in the world.
You're actually like a world-class, incredible video game player.
Yeah.
The Paragon board and the build, you're also an innovator there.
Yeah, I played a lot of video games.
You think about like StarCraft, any game where a lot of people are playing, to rise to the top, you have to be exceptional, period, as a human being.
Yeah.
There has to be something exceptional about you.
Yeah.
Are you like top 20 in the world or top 20 wow, in Diablo?
Yeah.
Shooting rockets into space, making e-vehicles, starting a new department of the government. I actually let myself think maybe he actually is an alien, because there's just no way, unless he's paying people to do it for him, which obviously he's not.
Oh.
Now, what I find out real quick there before we go into Quinn's breakdown. What's so funny about those clips they included is Joe Rogan and that guy there, they know he's lying. They know Elon is lying. Joe was like, really? You're top 20 all time? They know the incredulity is there, but they are afraid to criticize the billionaire who's actually funded all that.
Simps. Yep.
Well, I will say, they might just not know enough about Diablo 4 to understand like how much you have to like know life it. So they might know he's lying, but they might not realize like how obvious it is to everyone else that he's lying. Like how your parents don't know how much like gaming you might need to do in order to be like ranked #1 in League of Legends. Well, that's not how League of Legends works, but you know what I mean. We can play the clip. I have thoughts about it in terms of Elden Ring.
Me too, but I do just want to Matt's point about how they know he's lying. I heard Kyle Quincy make this point the other day, just about this era that we're in, like this postmodern era where it's all about your internal truth and you can make your own reality. And there's no objective truth. It's just my truth. Like, I really do think that Elon and this conservative MAGA movement epitomizes that very, like, mass psychosis that a lot of people are under right now. Just the idea that you can just by the sheer force of will and by